Hi, this is Paul, developer of Hyperion. I'd like to talk about some of the generative patches that I've designed recently just for fun. And some of the people on my Discord channels asked me to discuss how they were designed and talk about the elements that go to make them up. I've got 3 combi patches that I want to talk about today, and I'm going to take you through them one by one. Let's start with ambience number 1, and we'll have a quick listen first. So just quickly, I'm going to mute all the channels that generate sound, and we can take a look more closely at this patch. So this patch uses quite a lot of layers, as you can see. In fact, it uses all 16 layers, and it's driven by these different generator patches. There are 6 generators, and each generator is using a scale mapping or scale generating node, and each of those are having their data input pin modulated very slowly by a long LFO, and then they have a secondary square LFO which is generating a trigger to an ADSR, which creates a pulse which latches the value coming out of the scale generator, and that trigger is also triggering the note sender to send a note to the layer, in this case Synth channel 1. And in the channel 2 generator it's pretty much the same setup, but the number of beats for the trigger is different. The scale in this case is the same on each of these layers, I believe. Yep, Dorian. And the same for channel 3. Let's take a listen to channel 1. So this is just a factory patch that's receiving notes from channel 1 generator. The notes are kind of randomly generated in the sense that whilst I'm sweeping through this scale that's selected, the trigger here is triggering the input latch at a different rate than this is sweeping through the beats. Channel 2 has a different sound, a drone sound. Let's have a look at that one. Channel 3 is using the same system to generate notes on the same scale type. Let's look at channel 3 sound. It's called Polydrifter. This is a factory patch. And I may have made a few modifications here and there, and I may have added some LFOs to modulate things like the filter cutoff or wave shapes. And the idea with these kind of ambient type generative patches is to have gradual variation in pitch or tone or level for each of the layers, so that they blend in and out from each other. Layer 4 is a lead sound, and it's being generated, or it's being sent notes from channel 4 generator, again with a different number of beats. And this sound is using a lot of portamento or glide. So it's the original patch, but I've turned up the glide time. And I may have added some extra things again, like some LFOs to gradually modulate things like shape or panning. Let's look at layer 5, which is driven by channel 5 generator. Again, a different rate. Actually, these binary logic nodes are using the AND operation so that these two square wave LFOs interact with each other, and only when they both output a value of 1, then a note is triggered. So channel 5 generator is sending the sounds to everything in its place, or everything in place. And this is a sound which, whilst it's only receiving one note, it's selected a chord type and it's using the arpeggiator to play once through that chord every so often, and the notes are randomly selected in terms of their order. So the thing with this binary logic here is it means that the playback of that sequence is not as regular as the other generators higher up. And then we have a layer here which is just the reverb layer, which actually is receiving sounds from multiple other layers. So if we take a look, some of these probably send, yeah, so there you go. So this layer is sending audio to the aux bus number 1, as is this layer. The saw lead is also going to the aux bus number 1. Let's take a look at Polydrifter. Yep, that's also going to the aux bus. So those are the layers that are driven by notes, and as well as those kind of note driven layers, we also have some ambience layers here. So some of these layers are just going to play continuous background sound. This one is playing a water drip sample going into a granulator. And actually this one is actually using the notes input from the channel 1 generator, but it's got a really long decay time, and it's only set to be monophonic, so it does re-trigger, but it's also set to loop the sample. Now we have another background sound called Watery Backdrop. These two sample nodes are using the latch playback option, which means that they'll play in a loop forever, and they don't need to be triggered. They just play automatically as soon as you start the patch. And there is a global LFO here just modulating the output level so that this fades in and out from time to time. This layer is actually being driven by the channel 6 generator. Again, it's the same kind of setup as the other 2 or 3 channels before it. Square waves with a binary logic node so that it doesn't always trigger at the same rate, and a scale mapper with a very slow sine wave driving the data input pin, and that forces the scale generator to pick a different note from time to time based on the value. So it just cycles through the notes in the scale. And I also have some vocal samples here at the very last layer. So these are just some ambient samples that are just playing on triggers or continuously looping. So in this case, the sleep sample here has got the latch playback option enabled. This angelic voice is being driven by a square wave, so it only triggers once in a while. There's a chuckle sound here, which is also triggered once every 43 beats. The Ray Kurzweil sample is set to just play on a loop continuously. And there's another voice sample there again, triggered by a square wave. All of those samples, or most of them, 4 of them at least, are going into this vector mixer, which is gradually blending between each of those 4 inputs by using these global. Turn that down a second so I can hear myself. So these global LFOs are modulating the XY position of this vector mixer, and it's set to be in the middle by default. You can always move it, but putting it in the middle is a good place to start, and then use external modulation to move around the mix. All of those samples, those vocal samples, are going to a granulator effect and a big reverb. Let's just listen to this again.
3 deep breaths. I would like
All right, let's load the next one. So this patch takes a slightly different approach. It's got lots of layers again, but if we look inside the layers, most of these layers are either a drone sound that just plays continuously, or they have some kind of generator which is generating some notes. Let's take a look. Yeah, like for this one, for example, there's a sequence of steps which are preset MIDI note values, and they're being driven by a square wave, which is also driving the envelopes. So these are likely factory patches or patch pack patches that I've removed the notes input node from, and I've added these square waves and these integer sequences to drive notes and to pulse the envelopes. Let's take a listen to this patch. And I'm just going to mute all the layers so we can take a listen one by one. So let's start at the top. Actually, this top layer here is not even being used. I can get rid of that one. And let's listen to this drone pad. So you can see this pad is just playing a fixed note that never changes. It has a couple of global LFOs here that are modulating the output level so that it becomes silent from time to time, and also a filter at the output effects bus. Let's look at the next patch. So this is a factory patch that's had the notes input node removed. And again, it's using a fixed value, so MIDI note 45, note to hertz to generate the frequencies to the oscillators. And then a fixed value of 1 just to turn these envelopes on to start them. And they just basically hold forever. They don't ever release. This patch has a couple of LFOs controlling the vector mix so that you hear the different elements fading in and out gradually. Here's an ambient sound which is driven by an SNH LFO, triggering some ramp sounds, some ramping of the filter with some noise going into it. And it's just going into a granulator and a big reverb to just generate some kind of drippy sounds. Cream and Sugar. This is a pad that's taken from the factory set or one of the patch packs, and the notes input node is removed. You can hear this one fades in and out again because the level is being modulated. Actually, that's not connected to anything. I'm not sure why. Okay. This one has a note sequence that's driven by this square wave, and every time this square wave triggers, it triggers an envelope here to turn on the sound. Looks like I was planning on using this and disconnected it at some point. Probably connected it to the square originally. Or one of the LFOs, probably, actually. Let's see. Okay, never mind. Mystery Singer, it's a vocal patch. Again, with the notes input node removed, and a square wave driving an integer sequence. And that's going into a data smoother in this case, which is creating a portamento effect. Here's another patch, which is also driven by a sequence of notes. Here it's only 2 notes, but all these layers have got the MIDI notes selection related to each other in terms of pitch and scale. And the vocal pad. Again, it's going to be a sequence of frequencies. Looks like it's the same sequence as is used for Mystery Singer. Yeah. And a square wave. This is running at 54 beats interval. And let's have a look at this one. This is 32 beats interval. So the intervals are different for the different layers, just to make it more interesting so that things don't always happen at the same time. But because they're based on the same scale, it all stays more or less in tune. This one's level fades in and out because of this global LFO. Another layer is the choir. Again, it's a case of using a sequence of notes. It's the same sequence, a different beat, step, time. Big reverb. Some ambient sound underwater. Just a couple of samples that play on loop, heavily filtered with some modulation on the filter. And these samples just play automatically because, let's see, well, this one's triggered, yeah, they're both triggered by this ADSR, which is triggered by this square wave, which has got a really long interval. So they play once in a while, but they have really long decay times. Another tone, metal hit, driven by a square wave. So it only plays occasionally every 51 beats in this case. And we have this piano layer. The piano layer is a little bit interesting in the sense that it has its own scale generator here, but it only plays once in a while based on this square wave that enables or disables this other pulse wave, which triggers the scale mapping ramp. So this plays very rarely actually. I'm waiting for it. And the scale is set to a Japanese scale, Miyakobushi. Probably didn't pronounce that correctly. Eventually this is going to trigger. See, it's currently disabled, and when that drops to enabled, then this will be enabled so that it can run. There we go. And putting it all together, you can see here that I've got one layer which is dedicated to reverb, and I'm taking the aux return from bus 1, but also aux return bus 2 and 3 that have a crossfade node that is actually set to a pretty low rate so that it will blend between these two inputs very slowly. So some of these sounds are actually being sent out to the aux send. So let's look. I think the piano is definitely getting sent out to the aux send as well as its own reverb. Oh no, maybe not. Okay, it's got its own reverb. There you go. That one is Metal Hit is being sent out to the aux bus. That one is not. The choir probably no. This one has a little bit of its sound sent to the aux bus. Alright, that's ambience number 2. Now let's listen to the last one, ambience number 3. This is again a different design. This one has a single layer which is generating notes on 2 channels, channel 1, channel 2. Let's have a listen to this patch. So let me just mute all these parts. I'm going to keep the signs enabled. And let's just mute the rest of them. I'm going to keep this vector mixer enabled. This one is just blending the output of several layers who have their sounds sent to these 4 aux buses. And we're going to mute the notes generator layer as well, because whilst it's responsible for generating notes, it also plays these vocal samples that are driven by counter triggers. These different counters fire off at different times because they have different count limits, which will cause the counter to be reset, but also send a trigger pulse to the sample to start playing it. So let's just turn the volume back up and have a listen to those sine tones. So you can see that these 3 layers are almost the same, and they use the arpeggiator with the once option enabled, so that it just plays a chord that's been pre-selected here. It plays through the notes once, and you can see that one of the layers has random mode enabled, another is up, and another is down. And they all sound very slightly different because they use a random number generator. There's a random number generator here that can change the phase of these global LFOs, which control their panning and their wave shape. So they're all going to be, each of these 3 signs are going to be slightly different in terms of their current tone and pan. Just going to mute those for a moment. Now let's look at the other layers here. This is another layer that uses the arpeggiator. And it's got a pre-selected chord, minor extended seventh. And this layer uses these global LFOs to slowly modulate both the level, the wave shape, filter cutoff, so the tone is constantly shifting. This is a kind of a drone layer, which is driven by that root note. This is driven by channel 1. Those sine arpeggios were driven on channel 2. This is a very dry patch because it's a bass tone and I don't want to muddy up the mix too much, so this one doesn't have a reverb applied. And let's look at the next one. Again, driven by the same sequence of notes. Just a drone sound. And then we're going to look at the sequencer, layer 7. So this uses a predefined step sequence, an integer sequence and a float sequence. Just pin those. And whilst it looks fairly complex, I most likely use the MIDI learn function and the MIDI velocity and MIDI note learn function to input these notes. And what's happening is this patch is receiving the root note or the offset note from the note generator in this layer 16 here, which is constantly changing the root note, but also it's got its own fast sequence of offsets. So these offsets are being applied to the root note. There's a little bit of math here with the note values. You can see there's a value of -41 just to shift the values down so that they're at the correct pitch. And then this note to hertz node is converting the note values to the frequencies for these oscillators. And this layer, because it has a fast sequence, it has very short envelopes, so the sound plays very quickly. Again, this layer here, circuit theory, is driven by that same sequence of root notes. And this has a step sequence, again, that's driven by a square wave. So this is providing an offset to the incoming notes. There's some global LFOs to do some very slow filter modulations or shape modulations. This filter sweeper is a kind of a sound effect which doesn't get triggered very often, and you can see that it's got a very long interval, so we might not hear it for quite some time. There's also a wind layer, which is just some white noise with some some sine waves. There we go, that's the filter sweep. You can see how the filter's being modulated gradually downwards, but with a square wave to pulse it. So back to this wind layer. This has got it's actually using the envelope to modulate the filter here. Hang on, sorry, looking at the wrong patch. So let's look at the wind layer. And yes, the filter is being modulated by a global LFO, so the cutoff is being swept up and down. Let's look at ethereal drift. Another patch that's just driven by that sequence of root notes on channel 1. Then we have a laser harp, same sequence of notes. But I've added a long glide time to let it sweep between the pitches. Then we have this delayed bell tone. So whilst it's triggered at the same time as the other notes, its ADSR has a delay time so that it doesn't play immediately. Then we've got a choir sound, again driven on channel 1. A lot of reverb on this one. It's got its own reverb, but it's also being sent to the aux bus on bus number 4. So this vector mixer layer is taking, you can see I've renamed these nodes, but these are basically aux 1, 2, 3, 4. So these are taking audio feeds from each of the layers that are named, and then it's just doing a vector mix. There's actually no reverb here. I thought there was a reverb, but it's just a vector mix of these different layers. And let's just look at one more thing. So apart from those pitched notes that are being played, there's also some vocal samples that are one shots, as I said before. Let's have a quick listen to those.
You can feel increase in your unconscious mind. These wonderful, invigorating feeling what you need most right now. By just taking a more part of you in this special place. And you can savor this plate and you take a moment to relax. Be one big.
So these samples are triggered at different rates based on these counters, which auto reset, and they all have different count times, and they're all driven by this square, which is pulsing the trigger input on the counters. And then they also have panning applied with some sine wave oscillators, so that they all pan at different positions, which makes it kind of interesting.
Increase in your unconscious mind. Become more of a part of you, what you need most right now.
Let's re-enable all the sounds.
And you can receive it. Your enjoyment of you to this special place. And it can be heightened whatever you need. What you spend your
Thank you.
that was useful. And if you'd like to discuss these patches some more with me, join me on the Wave Sequencer Discord. Details in the description of the video. Thanks for watching.